is 10 a.m. Georgia time, day after Jeffrey Tucker's cryptocurrency conference. And today we are joined by a whole variety of people for what is going to be the essentially roundtable wrap-up on what is a very small table for this conference. My name is Adam B. Levine. We are once again on Let's Talk Bitcoin, and we have a lot of people here, so I'm going to let us go around the room, starting with you, Peter.
My name is Peter Shorta. People call me the Bitcoin economist, so that's what I am.
Jason King from Sean's Outpost, Satoshi Force and Bitcoin 100.
Elizabeth Cloche from Bitcoin Magazine and the Bitcoin Foundation.
I'm Zachary Silva, student and Bitcoin enthusiast.
Igor Gambisky, online education manager at the Institute for Humane Studies in Virginia.
I'm Kathy Reiselitz, Young Voices Associate, Editor-in-Chief of Sex and State, and writer at Reason Magazine.
I'm Becky Craig, part of the Life on Bitcoin team.
I'm Austin Craig, also part of that Life on Bitcoin documentary film project.
So I've been to a bunch of these Bitcoin conferences, and I know that there's a mix of first-time, conference attendees here and people who have been to a couple of them. Jason, I know you've been to pretty much everyone that... Wait, did you go to New York? You didn't go to New York.
You go to New York.
You go to New York, but we saw you in San Jose.
Yeah. A
lot of times we go to conferences that have more of a investor-tuned sort of theme or like talking a lot about the regulatory stuff. This conference didn't have any of that at all.
Yeah.
So generally speaking here, themes that emerged during this conference, what do you guys think? What was the big takeaway from it?
Well, what I liked is that there were a lot of people here that I wouldn't have considered, hardcore Bitcoiners that were here more because had an economic interest or a financial interest in it, and they were just like, this seems like it could solve so many problems. I want to go to this conference and see what it's all about, and I thought that was really awesome.
It's a big anarchist contingent. That was cool.
Big anarchist contingent. There was definitely a lot of that. So yeah, the libertarianness of this conference certainly was contributed to by the speakers that Jeffrey Tucker invited. Kathy, this was your first Bitcoin conference. What did you think? And did this differ from other types of conferences that you've attended?
I thought it was great. I'm used to going to libertarian conferences and tech conferences from when I did internet marketing. So this is a great combination of the two. One thing that I really loved was how much we all learned from the participants. The questions were excellent. We had participants clarifying points and bringing up really interesting topics. So I really enjoyed it.
Peter, you gave a lecture on Bitcoin as sound money. That's a controversial topic among certain parts of the Austrian crowd. Do you think that that's someplace where the Bitcoin community or the cryptocurrency community broadly is making headway on?
Well, I think that so far there hasn't been much research in this area done from the Austrian school, and what I would like to achieve is to motivate others to do more research and to build on top of what I and others like Konrad Graf, let's say, produced. And at the after conference party, I was approached by a guy who works for the Mises Institute, and he said that he's also a Bitcoin enthusiast and they're trying to do something, so maybe something will happen.
So maybe a sea change is coming.
It could.
So Peter, when you say research, do you mean like peer-reviewed or just kind of more experimentation?
I mean more theoretical research. There is a whole bunch of empirical research, but the real deep theoretical Austrian stuff, that there wasn't really much of that one.
I think that one of my favorite moments from the conference was Jeffrey Tucker's opening keynote, actually. He's a really interesting guy, a lot of character to him, and again, he's sort of one of these almost, I guess cult figure has an odd connotation to it, but it's like, if you know who Jeffrey Tucker is, then you like Jeffrey Tucker a lot. But if you don't know who Jeffrey Tucker is, then you don't know who Jeffrey Tucker is. And it seems like there's a large contingency of that. Certainly this was a more libertarian event because of that. And I think I saw more bow ties here than I have at any of the other the other events. But were there, what was the thing that made you go, it was worth coming here for this? And this doesn't necessarily have to be the conference either. We're talking necessarily about, the interactions, because certainly some of the most valuable interactions that I had were at the party, last night at the after event. So, Jason, what was it for you?
My favorite moment was actually talking to Peter after his speech, and I actually came up to him sort of fanboying to be like, hey, I really, really dug your speech, and I'd like to talk about alternative currency. And he's like, don't you remember we talked in San Jose? And I was like, I don't remember you in my panel. He's like, no, we were just like part of a mob walking, like Bitcoiners walking to a restaurant. We started having a conversation about homelessness. And like, I remembered that conversation, and it was just like, didn't know who I was having the conversation with. And he had remembered it, and it was like, it was really cool.
I think just talking to people after the conference and hearing all the different creative ideas to promote decentralization, whether it's e-commerce platforms or just new opportunities, and to see people already starting to collaborate after the conference and finding developers or business partners right here.
I found the conference overall to be very interesting. I unfortunately missed the opening section of it because I actually woke up at 4 in and drove in from St. Augustine, Florida, 6 hours. But overall, the conference was fascinating from start to end. The interaction was great. I personally am very much a fan of the libertarian environment here, but. So, great experience, and it's going on next year. It is going, yeah. All right, yeah.
How's another one? Has another year been announced yet?
That's what Jeffrey said.
Oh, great! I hadn't heard that. That's fantastic.
All right. Well, I'll be here next year, so and listeners, you should be too.
This is maybe something that a lot of old-time Bitcoiners would probably already be aware of, but it was news to me. I gathered this from both the talks and from personal conversations with people here. I didn't realize that cryptocurrency predates Bitcoin. That was a new concept. I didn't think that. I thought the publishing of Satoshi's paper was the birth of cryptocurrency, but Stephen at BitPay said he's been studying cryptocurrency for 20 years. And I stopped him and said, really? Did you mean you've been studying alternative currencies for 20 years? No, I've been studying cryptocurrency for 20 years.
The difference is the decentralization. That's the thing that Satoshi really introduced to the party. And I think that's the thing, in the past, that's the thing that's been a sticking point, because you can always shut down, a company, you can always shut down. It's much more difficult to shut down a protocol.
I think that's very important too, because people are like, well, Bitcoin's brand new. It's like, yeah, but it's an iterative improvement on things that we have been doing for decades now. And so to hear that quantified is pretty cool.
There's something that I saw on YouTube. It was an interview with Milton Friedman where he talked about someday we'll have a widely adopted electronic money. And I thought he was being so prophetic, but I suppose those things were even in development at that time when he was still alive in the early 90s. Not something I would have anticipated or really thought possible.
Well, it's definitely been a theme in science fiction for a while. If you think about Neil Stephenson, Snow Crash, things like that, a ubiquitous decentralized currency was part of the world, and it transcend, and especially that specific book, it being able to transcend so many different nation states, because there are tons of small little nation states in that book, but everyone's got a ubiquitous currency. So it was cool to see that was in that realm, but at the same time that there was hard research going on,
right,
being created.
And so this is completely blowing my mind. And in fact, there's something happened so this is my first Bitcoin conference, and I knew about it as a fringe, something that just seemed like just a fringe fad. But over the course of this conference, it just kind of really woke me up to the rich intellectual tradition that's actually evolving through these Bitcoin experiments. This experiment with how we can interact with each other. The idea of just revolutionizing, just sheerly using technology to solve problems of information in currency exchanges is something that now it seems like it's incredibly important for me as a libertarian. And that's the space I'm in, libertarian education, to really pay attention to what's happening in Bitcoin and how it can really change the relationship between man and the state.
And so that's something that happened over the last couple of days.
Yeah, from thinking Bitcoin, that's an interesting, cool thing, to seeing that this has ramifications for the future of humanity.
Right? And so I had the same feeling as someone that was already involved in Bitcoin. The smart contracts issue, the thing about being able to it solve so many issues past the currency problem, that really was brought home to me this weekend. It was wow, there really are all these opportunities out there for fixing so much of these broken systems.
Right.
That can all be engaged through cryptocurrency.
Right, very much so. The TCP/IP analogy really is a good one, because nobody knows. Nobody's using TCP/IP explicitly, but we're all using it through the services that have been built on top of it. And so, that's an interesting question. In the future, will we still trade Bitcoin, or will Bitcoin just be the pipes that run underneath everything, and or some other sort of cryptocurrency? And of course, that's something else we're going to go around the room and talk about whether or not the innovation is Bitcoin or if it's cryptocurrency broadly.
We chatted with Tony at BitPay right after we got here, right after we flew in Friday afternoon, and sat down, had a conversation with him. And one of the things that he said that really I had not considered before was that people would be using cryptocurrency, but they'd have no idea that that's what they were using. They'd be using the tools on top of it. And that it would be reaching out to people who are unbanked or underbanked. And these are ramifications that really had not occurred to me.
Yeah, John Stahl from the Bitcoin Foundation, actually, he was like, I think that we should actually punish people who use bit or coin in their company name. Because in a couple of years, Bitcoin's going to be so ubiquitous that, you having to come back and tell people that it's about Bitcoin, it's not going to matter. So it should just be about, the utility of the transaction. Right? And we're like, this is definitely Bitcoin, guys. So I thought that was really interesting.
That marketing idea of having bit or coin in the name is an interesting phase that we're in with the development of the Bitcoin economy. I feel like people are doing that now so they can draw in the new audience of the Bitcoin user base. But if it's going to grow and develop, it definitely needs to move beyond that. And from my background is in marketing, don't do that from a marketing perspective. I guess you can, but it really pigeonholes what you're able to do if your name is bitcoinskimaskshop.net or something like that.
What was your joke about Amazon? If Amazon
was onlineinternetbookstore.com, it would be really hard for them to have become the Amazon that we know today.
Well, I think there's a real world example of that. I think Zappos was initially sneakersite.com, and they actually were like, we're going to be completely pigeonholed here. So within the first year of operation, they're like, we have to have something a little more ubiquitous.
Well, it's kind of funny. We're having this conversation on a show called Let's Talk Bitcoin. For the last couple of months, I've been thinking about that name.
Let's talk cryptocurrency.
I know, but it doesn't roll off the tongue quite as well. So I'm still waiting for the word that replaces cryptocurrency to kind of come up.
LTV, man. I think that whole sci-fi is now just like sippy.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. But yeah, no, Austin, your point is very, very well made. I think that my background before getting into the Bitcoin space was in the environmentally friendly food service packaging space, which is to say the green space. And so the company that I was with was called Excellent Packaging, but every other company that we interfaced with was either green or bio or earth or all these other things. And very, very quickly, and we were already seeing it in Bitcoin, certainly, it's hard to keep track of these names. I mean, the pigeonholing is one side of it, but also they're just bad names because they sound like everybody else.
I really liked your point, Austin, about the unbanked populations that are being helped by cryptocurrencies. I think I heard Jeffrey Tucker talk about people in Nigeria who didn't have access to credit, don't have access to a stable currency, but are buying and selling in Bitcoin. And I think that's something that we don't think about as people who have access to other ways to buy things, is the importance of expanding that access to the third world.
And it's not just third world. I mean, we have over 35% of Americans are unbanked. So right here in quote unquote the first world, we have huge portions that are essentially third world here within America. And so, Bitcoin can reach out right here in America to do that.
Absolutely.
And obviously in Africa and other places as well.
It's funny, that enabling argument, I think, really works well for unbanked populations. But, I recently spoke with Jaron from CoinCenter, and he made the case that, eventually it's going to be banks that are using Bitcoin as their underlying infrastructure, and that people generally won't make person-to-person transactions because we live in a world that is surrounded by these know your customer requirements, and that even though they used to be true, there used to be thresholds below which you didn't have to have that stuff happen to you. Now those thresholds simply don't exist, and so every transaction, no matter what the thing, has to have this identity associated with it. We're obviously speaking with a fairly libertarian-oriented crowd here. What do you think of that idea?
Is there any conflict in that with banks using Bitcoin and cryptocurrency as the underlying protocol? Would there be a regulatory conflict between that happening and people who are unbanked using the same protocol?
No.
Could the environment arise where those two are at?
Well, this is more of a
every homeless guy needs to register as a money service business.
Right, but wouldn't that be cost and time? Yeah, that would be cost and time and expertise. That's an obstacle that if you're trying to figure out where you're going to sleep tonight and how you're going to get some food, the last thing you really need is paperwork. work. It's not something that I think any of us really look forward to. Do we see a time when the regulatory environment gets such that people can't legally use cryptocurrency or Bitcoin maybe?
Well, I think we're going to go through a growing pain here. I think I don't even want to give a time frame, maybe 5-10 years, where it's going to be this like weird amalgamation of legacy regulators trying to figure out a way where they could stamp down on it, but that's going to be coupled with the fact that you can't. I like the quote from this weekend that you can't really hold a gun to algebra. Like that Bitcoin is going to end run around pretty much in any attempt to regulate it. That Bitcoin is going to sort of work around it. It's like and the internet looks at censorship as damage and routes around. So I think Bitcoin will do a similar thing. So what I think we'll see is we're going to see this sort of murky area in the next 5 or 10 years, but ultimately, maybe hopefully what we'll see is government's going to have to start competing. Like if government wants to stay relevant, then government's going to have to start competing like a startup has to compete in a marketplace. And so if they really want to show that they have value, then they're going to have to be like, okay, well, we can provide better value, and they're actually going to have to prove that, and Bitcoin's not going to let them just be like, no, everything would fall apart if you didn't have us. It would be like, well, we have all these other services now. So I think that's ultimately where we're going to be headed. Maybe that's me being optimistic on it, but I definitely do think the next 5 or 10 years there's going to be this murkiness of them trying to regulate something, figuring out how they can sort of box up Bitcoin, and like Bitcoin's never going to be in the box,
And okay, so this is okay. Every single time I hear you speak, or I hear like these Bitcoin intellectuals speak about like the future, and just it is so inspirational. I felt so inspired during the conference, especially hearing about all of the social good, all of the charities that are set up. I think it was BitPay that was setting up a foundation. BitGive. And then what you're running, a Bitcoin-funded homeless shelter, helping homeless people in Florida. It's incredible that we're building alternative structures to government institutions that we kind of look for to provide these services. And I think providing them better, like startups, going through iterative processes.
Absolutely.
And being very accountable directly to the funders, right? Not taxpayers and bureaucrats, but people who are giving without a third-party arbiter money to actually directly invest into the social good.
Okay, so I can actually give you a specific example of how like Sean's outpost in Bitcoin just like destroyed the existing legacy architecture there, which is we had a homeless girl that we were helping who got a disease called Guillain-Barré, which is a terrible nerve disorder. And if you can imagine, it's terrible if you have a home. It is just devastating if you're in the street living like in an old boxcar in the woods. So we pushed her through the system of getting emergency disability. And so this is a young girl, fairly attractive 26-year-old girl who went from being able to run around and jump from train to train to being essentially paralyzed and living in a box in the woods. So, I mean, there's a lot of issues with that. So emergency disability was 90 days. So there was 90 days where she went from after she left the hospital to where we were having to come out, check on her absolutely every day and make sure and try to leave someone posted so that she didn't get abused while she was out there. Well, 90 days was actually unheard of. The disability lawyers were like, you'll be lucky to see this money in 9 months. And so we got it in 3 months and we're all super happy. And so she had a check. This is a check backed by the United States government. And so she didn't have an identification. So we had to go and argue with the DMV. And that was, a couple of hours before we could convince them just to give her an ID to cash this one check. And then once she had a government-issued ID and a government-issued check, we went to 5 different banking or monetary institutions, and they all would not cash the check. And it was because she's homeless, so when they run a base credit profile on cashing it, one of the things that we don't think about is having a permanent residence is a huge portion of your credit profile. So she was getting kicked back as unable. So this is literally a government-backed institution for the government's safety net of how they're supposed to be taking care of disabled people. And with 5 institutions, Wells Fargo, Bank of America, PNC, Walmart, and an Ace check cashing place all would not cash this check. And we finally had to go to a usurious mom and pop check cashing joint where they charged 6% of the check to for a paralyzed woman to cash your government, check 6% after being denied 5 times. And I was just like, if they would have just paid in Bitcoin, like this would be done. Like, there would be no wait time. There wouldn't be any of this crap. And so it's those kind of things where it's like, for instance, like Wired did a piece about some guys that we help. When people send donations to those guys, they get, their support is instant. And this was 90 days plus all this hassle for the legacy system on it. And going forward, I think that there would be no way for literally government to compete in that market, and that if they're going to have to compete because it will become a market for those sorts of things.
Which, by the way, the government's trying to shut down those mom and pop places, the last refuge.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So great.
Which, it makes me wonder, you're saying the government's going to have to compete, and now my bias is going to show wide open. How on earth can they compete when you have this fast, nimble, independent group of people using this wide open protocol, and the government's business is regulation? How on earth could they compete with that? I think they're probably going to try to continue to box it, as you said, and into fail. Perpetuity, continue to try to shove this into a box.
And then they're going to end up like so many governments around the world that technically the government still exists, but in practice that they're just impotent. I mean, they're not going to have the ability to control after some point.
But that story is such a call to arms because that's our safety net, and it's completely...
And it's not a safety net.
It's not acceptable, and we need to build an alternative. We need something else, and that's what Bitcoin can be, and that's what we need to give to, and that's what we need to create, like, now.
And the craziest part is that the existing sort of, stewards that walk you through this, like the, Social Security lawyers and disability lawyers, they were all like, wow, 90 days, that's amazing. Wow, that's so great. We're so happy for you that it only took 90 days and that she didn't die in 90 days. That's awesome that she's still alive to get this money.
That was a good outcome.
Right. I was like, wow, this is the positive outcome. Like, how many people, like, never see that check,
And how many people are not seeing that check and we don't know anything about them. We sit here in comfort and think the safety net exists and it's sufficient, and it's not.
It's absolutely true.
I think that kind of brings up an interesting point. Recently, there's been a lot of focus in the tech space that's not Bitcoin specific about the idea of being able to have ubiquitous sensors in the world and being able to tie what those sensors generate to identity. And it's an interesting question because the problem, again, that you ran into, Jason, was that her identity wasn't sufficient for what they wanted it to be in order to give her permission, authorization to have this money that was hers, rightly. So, I mean, is money something that we should have identity connected to in the first place? Is that a valuable service at any level anymore?
I loved Charlie Sherm's comment on this when he was talking about the reboot of BitInstant. He's like, I think legacy banking, like, out the gate treats you like a criminal, and then it's up to you to prove to them that you are not out to just rob them blind. And BitInstant's like, we try to, like, extend to you that, like, it's not that big of a deal. We don't want all your information, and if you're going to do a huge volume, we're going to need more information on you at some level. But for you to just transact, $500 a day in Bitcoin, $1,000 a day, whatever your bottom level is, I mean, that's, I think, more than most people would need to transact in a day for a very minimal amount. I think that's a really great step on their part. But no, I don't think that financial transactions identity need to be tied to each other.
I mean, it's a proxy, right?
Yeah.
So you're trying to figure out the whole credit score requirement, trying to figure out if you have a home we're trying to predict whether you're going to be willing and able to pay.
And so what's awesome, and that, like, what we didn't talk about, but sort of is there, is that one of the reasons that banks have that issue where they want to make sure your identity is because they actually are on the hook for it. I mean, whether or not we should give a crap if they're on the hook for it is another conversation. But, like, you could fraudulently produce a check, and, like, maybe that check won't get funded. So maybe they need to have something. But, like, the fact is, if I send you Bitcoins, I can't get those Bitcoins back. Like, you have those Bitcoins. You don't have that, that risk. So because that risk is completely mitigated with Bitcoin, like, I think that we should be able to at least loosen some of this IT requirement.
Absolutely. This is digital cash. It's a different dynamic. If you're dealing with cash on a day-to-day basis, the person who's taking my cash at the corner grocery store doesn't ask for my identification.
Exactly.
This is the digital equivalent. They don't yet ask for that. That ID requirement shows up when you have much larger sums and it's not a cash transaction. Just by virtue of the fundamental dynamic, I don't think that identification requirement needs to be there at all.
But making cash transactions makes you suspicious in our society.
Yeah, using large cash sums, suddenly you're suspected to be a criminal. How on earth could you have gotten $10,000 and why are you crossing a border with it? And we're going to take this from you for your own good.
Don't be a food co-op in America. Don't be a food co-op that takes cash. That's just problematic.
You're listening to Let's Talk Bitcoin, the premier audiocast providing news and insights that cover the rapidly evolving world of digital money. Our twice-weekly shows include analysis of late-breaking news, updates on key technical, business, and regulatory issues, and in-depth interviews with the key people driving the new digital economy. Let's Talk Bitcoin offers sponsors an attractive way to reach a targeted and savvy audience. For more information, email sponsors@letstalkbitcoin.com.